Morning. You know, the talk this morning, the reflection this morning is based on Matthew 6. And it'll take me a while before I get around to that particular reading that you heard this morning. But it's all about taking things for granted. And as I'm sitting there, I'm looking up, and I'm seeing Pat Galbraith on the piano. And I'm thinking, my goodness, do we take Pat for granted for a whole lot of things or what? I mean, putting services together, doing all these things, and then filling in wherever she's needed. But we don't take it for granted, Pat. It is appreciated. But did you ever stop and think about the many, many things that we all take for granted? We don't even think about them until something goes wrong, and then we give them some thought. And it would be impossible for me this morning to sort of go over all of the things that we take for granted, because we all take different things for granted. But I did try to put them into a number of categories, and you can put a number of things into these categories as well, things that I might not mention. And I sort of called them, I sort of called them my 5 categories of things we take for granted. And you can read there the absolute, without question, unequivocal necessities of life. The things that we cannot live without. We need them. And as I was putting it together and I saw the My 5, I thought, my goodness, how affected I am even by cell phone literature and the My 5 things, your private My phone numbers or whatever that's out there. But there's a smiley face there, and it's there for a reason. We can all determine how necessary these things really are in our life. But we certainly do take them for granted. And the first one is in a category, the first one is electricity. So we'll just take a look at electricity. And I know that we tend to forget about how important electricity is in our lives until we don't have it. And we've all had that experience, I'm sure, where it's gone out at the wrong time. Well, there's never a right time for it to go out. But we have a big presentation the next day. We have an exam the next day. We have something going on, so we're well prepared. We go to bed early, and shortly after we go to bed, the power goes out. Now, we don't know the power's gone out until the morning when we don't wake up on time because the alarm clock didn't go off. Now, in this day and age, we have other ways to wake us up other than that electric alarm clock. I understand that. But we can also appreciate the fact that we've had those days. And then you get up, there's no lights, there's no heat, there's no hot water. It's not a really good way to start the day at all. No toaster, no coffee, no oven. It's bad. And now we're wondering, what are we going to do? Well, we finally get ready, we get out, and maybe we have a car in the garage, maybe we don't, but if you do have a car in the garage and you get in there and you push that button, open that garage door, it doesn't work. And it takes you a couple of minutes to realize there must be another way to open this door. And then when you finally get it open and you just hope that your car will start, right? You get it open and you leave and you think, well, I better call somebody and tell them that I'm going to be late. So you reach for your cell phone, but you just remembered you left it on the charger overnight. So now you got a really rough day, right? Anyway, we can think of many ways that we take electricity for granted, but there are probably a whole lot of things out there that don't appreciate electricity quite the same way that we do. Just trying to lighten things up a little bit here, folks. One of the other things that we take for granted would be our automobiles themselves. And we do. And I'm sure we've all had that thing where we have the no car start day. We've all had that experience. And of course, it's always when we're in a rush. Maybe it's after the power's out, who knows. But the car, hopefully it's not, because that would really be a disastrous day. But the car won't start. And we start to think, maybe some of these things that we take for granted require a wee bit of maintenance. Maybe we should have taken the car in for that service check that we're supposed to. Maybe we should have figured out that the battery wasn't working right the previous days when it would shut off and on and our lights would go funny. But we don't. We just take it for granted. And then, after everything's gone wrong, perhaps we're going to get into a traffic jam like we're going to see here in a second. Now, you probably can't see it all that well back there, but this is in Beijing, and it took 11 days to clear all of the cars from this particular traffic jam. So if we think we have it bad when we get caught in traffic, and we've all been caught in traffic, but the picture said much more to me when I saw that than just the automobile that we take for granted. It also talked to me about our environment that we take for granted. Just imagine what all those cars sitting in that one little part of the world, what's happened to our environment just with those cars running. And just think about where those cars go when they no longer run. And think about all of the miles and miles and miles of forest that had to be cut down, and the asphalt and the oil products. I could talk about that for a long time, but I won't. The bottom line is we take our environment for granted as well. And only when it starts to let us down do we start to think, well, maybe it's time to fix it. Maybe it's time to do something. And thank goodness there are folks out there and there are groups out there who are keeping us up to date on some of the things and encouraging us to do some things in our own life so that this thing that we take for granted will be around for a lot longer. We can go from the automobiles, snowblowers. It's going to be hard for the snowblowers to be working today, but we do take the lawn mowers, the snowblowers, a whole lot of other things for granted. And I would be willing to bet that we've all had times when they just won't work. And we discover that when we need them the most. And then we start to think, we take them into the shop who's glad that they don't work because they fixed them. And they tell us, you can't be leaving your gas in these things all winter, or you can't be leaving them on there all summer. It's going to gum up the carburetor. They're just not going to work. You have to put a spark plug in it. These things that we take for granted require maintenance. They require a little bit of care. And if we give them that, they probably won't let us down. Smartphones. It's amazing. A lot of the other things have been around for a long time, but this whole cell phone technology and smartphone technology hasn't. And if you really sit back and think about it, to me anyway, it's frightening how quickly this technology is sort of grasping our lives and making it an absolute necessity of our life, if you will. With cell phones, smartphones especially, what can't they do? Our texting, tweeting, Facebooking, emailing, and yes, they are phones too, although you notice they're not used as much for phones these days. They're used for other things. We can find out anything about weather. We can find out about a GPS sort of thing. There's even a person called Siri. Does anybody know about Siri? Siri is one smart lady, right? You can ask Siri anything. What should I wear today, Siri? And somehow they know where you live, where you are, and they can make a suggestion as to what you should wear and about the weather. Seriously. Anyway, smartphones. How smart? Matt's going to talk to Siri now, I can tell. How smart are smartphones? Well, this is interesting when we take a look. You probably can't see that all that well, but it's talking about the one in the lower left. That's right, bro. Our ancestors had buttons, right? We have no buttons on these cell phones unless you have Blackberries. And then the picture, it says, that's right, dear. Our ancestors had tails. And it's not that long ago that we had those phones with tails. We still have them, although younger people might not know what they're all about. Heck, how many of us can remember party lines? Anyway, so how smart are cell phones? Let's just go to the next slide. And I know, do you mind if I strap your phone to my forehead so I can pretend you're looking at me when I talk? I don't know how smart smartphones are, because I don't think it's technology being taken advantage of here or being taken for granted. I think it's a relationship, perhaps. And I am sure that I shouldn't say I'm sure. I see this a lot. I see this kind of thing, and you wonder, why am I even in the room with this person? They'd rather be with someone else, right? But anyway, they're smartphones. And the Internet. More and more patients are going to the Internet for medical advice. To keep my practice going, I changed my name to Dr. Google. How many? I mean, we're all doctors, really, right? All we have to do, we don't need a degree. We just need to go to the right location on the Internet. I could have put in here also cable television. Could have put a whole lot of other things that we sort of take for granted. And all we have to do is, when they don't work, it's sort of like that car not starting. It's sort of like no electricity. And the reality is it really one of those absolute necessities of life? I'm getting now to the more serious ones, because I believe that Canada is one of those things that we take for granted. Now, when I say we, I complain too. I complain perhaps about our Prime Minister Harper, but it didn't matter because I complained about Mulroney and Chrétien and everybody else. We tend to do that. You know, we tend to complain about our health care system. We tend to complain about voting. We complain about employment insurance. We complain about the social things that are in place. But I would ask anyone to sit back, and if you were in charge, what kind of government would you have? What would you do to make things better? We just take the many things that our country offers us for granted. If we don't like the way our country is being run, all we have to do is arm ourselves with a pencil. A pencil every few years. And we can make a decision then. We don't arm ourselves with guns and hand grenades and tear gas to overthrow governments. We can do it in a purely democratic way. I'd like to just share one quick little story that I didn't even have scripted. I just thought about it here. And it was with a student that I had a number of years ago. His name was David Chu. And David was entering a public speaking contest. And the contest was all about why you're proud to be a Canadian. And he liked public speaking. There was a $1,000 prize, and he thought he could have a chance to win. Matt, you might even remember him. So he entered this contest, and we were working on his presentation, his speech. And I was asking him a bunch of things. Well, you're not from Canada. Like, your parents chose to come here. Like why? And he listed all kinds of things. And it became very clear that of all the places his family could have settled in the world, they chose Canada. And his whole presentation then was based upon he's a Canadian by choice. He won $1,000. So we take this country of ours for granted so many times when it has so many wonderful things to offer us. And there are so many people in so many parts of the world that actually pray for the kind of system that we take for granted. Our health. It's one of those things that we do. Not everybody, but generally speaking, our health is something we take for granted until it's let us down, or we think it's let us down. And then we start to think about the things we could have done, perhaps, to prolong this. Perhaps we could have exercised more. Perhaps we could have eaten better. Perhaps we could have done a whole lot of things. It's not until we lose our ability to walk or don't have that, or to talk, or to speak, or to listen, I should say, then we appreciate our health. And sometimes we don't even appreciate what other families are going through because we have our health. And health isn't always something that you can see, that you can visualize. And that there are other families, other people out there who are dealing with some health issues that we take for granted. And I would suggest this morning that our health is one of those things that we obviously should never, ever take for granted. And the fourth thing, remember I said there were five, so we're on number 4 now. The fourth thing is our relationships. And we make the assumption that just because something has always been one way, or somebody has always been there for us, that they always will be. And what an incorrect assumption to make. Because life has a funny way of taking things from us. You know, just like that lawnmower and like that snowblower and that automobile that require maintenance, well, relationships take a lot of maintenance. They take a lot of care. And sitting on that smartphone while somebody that you care next to you is not one of the ways to do it. So we take these relationships for granted. Now, I came across these next 2 things. They're not mine. They're just things that I found, and they're not exactly well written, but they make the point. Regarding those relationships, all the things that annoyed you so much are the things you'll miss the most when they're gone. We all have had that experience. And don't be mad when someone else starts to appreciate the person you took for granted. What you won't do, someone else will. We do not take relationships for granted. You know, there's a lot of things in life, and we've heard the expression many times, you have to take time to smell the roses. We've all heard that expression, right? You have to take time to smell the roses. And the roses represent so many different things in our lives, but they represent the good things. They represent quite often the things that we take for granted. The beauty of nature, the country that we live in, the people that we spend our time with. They represent all of those things. I'd like to take that one step further, and we'll just go to the next slide, and we give thanks for the roses. We give thanks for those roses that we have. I mean, we can appreciate them, we can take time to smell them, but where do they come from? Who has made these roses and all the significant things that the roses represent? Who's made them possible? And as Christians, we know the answer to that. God has made all of these things in our lives that we take for granted. He's made them all possible. So how do we give thanks for the roses? And the fifth category is through prayer. And I believe, and I'm speaking very personally here now, that prayer is something that many just sort of take for granted. It's sort of like that snowblower. You expect it to start, although you didn't really maintain it. We just take it for granted. So often in our prayers, we pray for things that we want. We pray for miracles instead of pausing sometimes to pray to give thanks. Nothing else perhaps in the prayer, but to give thanks for all of these things that we have personally and as a group in our community. We just don't do that enough. And the reality as well is we could pray once a year, or we could pray 20 times a day. My own feeling is it doesn't really matter a whole lot to God, because He knows what we're thinking anyway. He knows what we want. He knows all these things. So there are many, many reasons to pray, and I guess I'm just going to focus on one of them here, and it's almost like a selfish reason for praying, but it's praying for some direction and some guidance. This morning, you heard from Matthew 6, verses 5 to 8, and it talked about one way to pray. Now, praying is kind of a strange thing, too, I think, because perhaps we've been in a situation in a group, and at the last moment we've been asked to say a prayer. Now, I don't know how you folks feel about that, but my knees start to shake, right? I mean, just like that, we have to say a prayer in front of a whole lot of people. It can be a little bit intimidating, and it's happened to a lot of us, because how do we pray? What do we pray for? I don't want to stumble. I want to say things just the right way. In Matthew, this morning, we discover that you don't pray necessarily so that everybody else can hear. Don't be like the hypocrites. And he's saying that there are some out there who just pray to be heard. But Matthew talks about that one-on-one relationship